All right. Thank you all so much for joining us for our November chapter meeting, our introverted leadership panel. I'm just going to be going over a little bit, but first wanted to welcome you from the STC Florida chapter. We're glad you're here. We are the Florida chapter of the Society for Technical Communication. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I know you're familiar with who we are, but still just want to mention, for those who might be interested, membership season is open for STC. And reminder for people who are our members to make sure to select our chapter when you renew your membership, because we're always excited to have people on our membership list and looking forward to continuing, into a great year next year. And so glad you're here with us tonight. So just a quick note about upcoming chapter meetings. Our December event is our holiday social that is free. We will be doing that on Zoom just to get together, talk about the year. Sometimes we do a bit of reflection on the year's events. I think that might be a little too overwhelming, so we certainly cannot pick all the events that happened this year to reflect upon, but just focus on, talking about holiday plans, chatting, getting to see familiar faces. I did have a note here. We have this Madcap Flaring with Scott Deloach that is like this ongoing scheduling challenge due to repeated hurricanes, but we're hoping to have the date announced for that very soon. So stay tuned if you are interested in hearing from him about Madcap Flare. So I will put the link in the chat for joining STC Florida. Just a reminder again about renewal time. I know sometimes it sneaks up on us because, we're all heading into the holiday season, but just wanted to make sure those who are members or who want to be members will make sure to sign up or renew their membership.
And something I put in the chat is it might be possible that we're listed still alphabetically as Orlando. So look for us in the P's and the O's.
Yeah, I think we're under where we would be alphabetized for Orlando, Central Florida still.
Mhm.
So appreciate the reminder, Alex. And then a quick overview for the event. Just a couple other announcements from the chapter. And then Julia Southwick, who is our vice president, is going to be doing just a little intro to our topic on introversion and leadership. And then our esteemed panelists will be doing some introductions, and then we'll be opening up for questions. Julia has some prepared, but we're also happy to just jump right in if our guests and audience members have questions to ask. So let me go on to the next slide. We are looking for chapter volunteers, particularly for employment chair and recognitions chair. So if you're interested in helping connect people with jobs or helping us recognize our members, those are roles we're looking to fill. If you did volunteer, we would not be setting you adrift. We do have, policies, procedures, and assistance from our chapter, but we're always looking for people there. And I have to, of course, mention every time, if you would like to build your portfolio or you have a great topic you want to share and be published, please reach out to Julia, our newsletter editor and communications chair, about being published in our newsletter, Memo to Members. Julia is very nice, so you don't have to be afraid of, some intense red pen or anything like that on your edits. So without further ado, I think I'm going to hand it to Julia to do an introduction to our topic.
Thanks, Bethany. It's working on the unmute button there.
No problem.
So today's event is on introversion and leadership. And why do we still need to talk about this? The next slide, please. Quick definition from Psychology Today, so we're all working with the same understanding of it. Introversion is a basic personality style characterized by a preference for the inner life of the mind over the outer world of other people. One of the big 5 dimensions that define all personalities, introversion sits on the continuum, with the opposite end of which is extroversion. Compared to extroverts, introverts enjoy subdued and solitary experiences. Not all of the time, please note. Introverts, raise your hands. Just kidding, it's Zoom. We'll put out a poll for you.
Sorry, Zoom polls fought with me, so instead we have a Google form. Well, we'll share it. And I know we do have the hand raise feature in Zoom, but that's always a delight to work with. I was on a call where someone thought that raising the hand was the same as like applauding, so they kept raising their hand on a call and not realizing that it was flagging everyone. Do you want me to continue to the next slide, Julia?
Wasn't sure if we were going to wait for results first, but we can absolutely
I
move
figure
to the
we
next
can
slide.
circle back to it. How's that? Give people a chance.
Okay. Just some quick misconceptions about introverts. Some might say they're shy, they lack confidence, they are loners, they aren't leaders, which tends to come from a extroversion as the norm perspective, which on the next slide, I learned a lot about it from Quiet, Hard Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain, thanks to a recommendation from Lori. In the front of the book, there's a manifesto, which I put on the slide, that gives the quick one-sentence summary of every chapter. You can read that at your leisure. The slides will be available later.
All right. Do you want me to show the results of the poll?
Sure.
Not surprisingly, because I gave people an other, people responded with other options. I'm so shocked by this crowd giving a nuanced response. But it looks like on a whole, the bulk of the group says somewhat introverted. And then I think we have no one no one said very extroverted. I'm shocked on an introverted leadership panel. And then we've got a couple for ambivert, which is one of those interesting terms that I think people have different definitions for, but often I think is a useful label for people who aren't quite fitting into either side of the camp. So maybe that'd be a good something to discuss if that comes up during our panel. All right. You want me to go on to the next slide now, Julia?
Yes, please. Some of the leadership qualities of STC Florida are collaboration, compassion, courage, creativity, flexibility, and wisdom. We came up with these definitions while revamping the leadership development program.
One of our concerns was that our previous qualities skewed very extroverted in sort of sometimes just in connotation.
I think we're ready to introduce the panelists. We have Ben Woelk, Lori Meyer, Nick Ducharme, Sarah Feldman, and Todd Deluca. If you could each please take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves and give a short couple sentences or so about your leadership journey as an introvert. We're introverts here.
Julia's like, I'm the secret extrovert.
I can pretend to be, but I'm really not.
Exactly. I think we'll just have you guys go in order as you are on the slide. So that would put Ben up first. I'm going to spotlight your videos. So prepare yourselves.
Couple of sentences. Julia, you're making this really, really
I think
challenging.
she'll allow paragraphs.
Yeah, I was going to say. I'm Ben Welk. I am the Governance, Awareness, and Training Manager in the Information Security Office at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I am currently teaching classes in cybersecurity policy and law and introverts in leadership. And we actually did our communication improvisation workshop Tuesday night this week in person for the first time in 3 years, which was nice because we've been doing it on Zoom and you can do it, but it's a little awkward. In terms of my leadership journey, I started with STC with the Rochester chapter a while ago, 14 years ago, somewhere around there, I think it was, in terms of leadership. Became a member of the board of directors around 2012, 2013. I was the community affairs committee chair for a couple of years where I roped in Bethany, and she still hasn't totally escaped at this point. Off the board for a while, worked on building the STC scholarship program, which is now successfully launched. And then I did the vice president, immediate past president roles in STC overall. Currently working on helping RIT develop a technical communication certificate program and working with Jennifer Good recently at Mercer University on developing leadership academy programs. In my spare time, there is no spare time. So I will turn it over to, I guess, Lori's next.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And can you all hear me? That's always my first question.
Yes, we can hear you, Laurie.
Oh, okay. And actually, as an introvert, I'm often told that I need to speak louder. So that's one of the challenges I have. But I am currently employed in Northern California as a cybersecurity technical writer. I've been involved in STC for many, many years. I'm currently serving on the STC Board of Directors and chair of the STC Community Affairs Committee. And we're here to support communities in their efforts to grow and be stronger and grow their membership. So it's a great role and it's a good leadership exercise. Do you want me to just go ahead and share the journey now, or is this just introductions?
Quick question, Lori. Do you have your video off intentionally?
Oh, yeah, I was trying to save bandwidth. Let me just put it
okay.
on here. Okay. Let me just, okay, so can you see my video now?
Yes.
Okay. So do you want me to go ahead and share the leadership journey, or is this just the introductions? Okay. So my leadership journey has actually been challenging and insightful, and ultimately it's been a blessing for me because I started out as ground zero as leadership. I had no belief that I had an ounce of leadership capability in me. And of course, that has changed over the years, thanks to what I've learned and support I've gotten, especially in STC. That has been a tremendous benefit for me to be part of this. What I'd like to do is just do a quick sharing of what I've learned about introverted leadership in relation to the information that we've, been working with over the years. And when I was growing up, the term introvert wasn't even on anybody's radar screen. So those of us who were considered on the quiet side were often described as shy. And we know now that there is definitely a difference between shyness and introversion, although sometimes they overlap, but not all introverts are necessarily shy. And so that's been a kind of a challenge because children are often tagged early in their lives as shy, and that's a hard label to throw off. And the problem is that shyness was considered something that had to be conquered, how to conquer shyness, how to be less shy. And, we were told things like, make a goal to meet 5 new people in the next 3 weeks, or, try practicing extending yourself. Stand in talk with customers in line at the supermarket. And one suggestion was even ask a fellow customer in line if you could borrow $1 from them, offer to pay them back. And that's a way you establish contact with somebody and make new friends. So that's, I remember hearing that and I was absolutely horrified. I thought, I'm not going to do that. But I thought, well, I'm shy, so I better consider it. But now I know as an introvert that that's just not part of me. That's not the way I work. So I have had many confidence issues, no question about it, because, of the way I was raised. On the other hand, I do know that calling myself shy is not really quite accurate. So that is a valuable lesson that I've learned. And being a strongly introverted person, I'm probably the most introverted person that you might have met. One thing I've discovered is that I do have some leadership capabilities, and I can exercise leadership despite being an introvert, because introversion really, as Julia noted in a slide before, that it's the way your preferences as far as how you interact with your environment. And just because you tend to need interaction all the time with people, less than maybe an extrovert does not mean that you have a problem. It just means that you respond to your environment in a different way than extroverts. And that's not necessarily bad or wrong. And it's not fair to our extroverted brothers and sisters to feel like they're the ones that always have to, be out there and interact with everybody, because, extroverts have their own challenges. So, if we can understand each other, that's always very good. So, another thing is that introversion is not synonymous with timid. And that's another huge problem that quiet people have. They might be seen as too hesitant, not having enough confidence. But I know now, having learned about introversion and having met many people who are very capable leaders despite being introverted. And that's a slip of the tongue. I shouldn't have said despite being introverted, because introversion can actually be an asset to your leadership capabilities. So, knowing these people who share the introversion characteristic with me has been tremendously educational and inspirational and encouraging. So that is just very, very helpful. Introversion is not synonymous with being, quote, too sensitive, unquote. Now, the whole issue of sensitivity is something that everyone involved in leadership, whether you're a leader yourself or training leaders, needs to know more about. It's an issue that is very misunderstood. People are perceived as too sensitive, too thin-skinned. You got to be less sensitive, all wrong. In fact, there's a book called The Highly Sensitive Person. This was a groundbreaking book that was written maybe about 10 years ago, the first edition, by Dr. Elaine Aron, and I'll put a link to it in the chat. And she dispels a lot of misconceptions about high sensitivity and how it relates to introversion. She tells us that, and this is based on science, high sensitivity is a neurological trait. It is hardwired into us. There is nothing bad about it. And you're not going to get rid of it. I am one of the 10% or so people in the population who is highly sensitive. And yes, it's been a challenge. And it's important to prepare, especially in a professional environment, how you respond to things as a highly sensitive person, because what it is the intensity to which you respond to external stimuli. So we highly sensitive people tend to be more sensitive to noise. We tend to react more strongly if we're yelled at. That does not mean that we're weak. It just means that that's how our neurology works. And so there's no such thing as being too sensitive. It's just that you have to know yourself and the best way to prepare as a professional. So, this is a good comment that Bethany made here. Yes, not wanting to be yelled at is incredibly reasonable. Absolutely. Yes. So, it is not bad to be highly sensitive. I will always be highly sensitive. I can't get rid of it, but that's all right, because I can grow and learn despite it. So all of these things, as I've learned about introversion, as I've understood myself as an introvert, the Myers-Briggs inventory, if many of you have taken that, it is a, really insightful assessment to take, because it helped me to see myself as someone who just has some characteristics that are a little different from somebody else. And that is okay. And so I will put the link to Dr. Aron's book in the chat, because I strongly recommend it. And I am fortunate and blessed to have learned from my fellow introverts. And I hope that will help me to understand our extroverted brothers and sisters as well, because they have value to add too. They have many good strengths, as we do. So thank you.
Oh, I think it's my turn. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Ducharme. I'm a technical writer at Sagent, a mortgage lending software company. I enjoy video games and tabletop gaming. My husband and I just bought our first house in DeLand, Florida. Prior to joining STC, I dabbled in a couple formal leadership roles. I was floor rep for my dorm's council, and I was even a team captain for a quick serve restaurant at Universal Orlando Resort. Neither honestly brought me much fulfillment, especially as an introvert. These were very extrovert heavy environments. And well, I also don't think I was very good at those roles either. And that was demoralizing at the time. I think part of, many leadership journeys is finding what works and, more to the point, what doesn't work for you. And sometimes that can be a bit of a temporary blow to one's confidence. In fact, my lack of success at the team captain role ended up as one of the catalysts that drove me to switch majors from hospitality management to tech comm. As a member of STC Florida, I have taken on various leadership roles when I've been asked to do so, such as newsletter editor, communications chair, director at large, vice president, and acting president. I even represented the chapter as part of 2 group presentations at the STC Summit in 2018, which we hosted here in Orlando. Well, I say here in Orlando as though I'm still in Orlando. Still getting used to that. This year, I was honored to receive a Distinguished Chapter Service Award for all of these efforts. Part of the inscription reads, "For your proactive leadership that strengthened our member engagement," which, if I was talking to myself from about 10 years ago, I wouldn't believe that I was capable of those things. So it's possible for us all to find our leadership side of ourselves in some way or another. And I'd say what I've learned through my STC experiences and throughout my tech comm career is that leadership comes in many forms, both formal and informal. All of them equally valid, even if some are maybe less visible or mainstream than others. You don't have to be a manager or a chapter director to be a leader. I've discovered that even as an individual contributor at my company, which is a valid career path and one that makes me quite happy, by the way, there are opportunities every day to lead in ways both large and small. And yeah, so that's kind of why I decided to join this panel when the opportunity was presented. I'm not a formal leader in what I do, but I have been in certain capacities, and I think leadership is part of all of us. And thank you. You all are very kind in the comments.
Lovely, Nick. I think it's my turn. Hi, everyone. Sarah Feldman. I know most of you and happy to see everyone else here as well. I'll just touch on a couple leadership related highlights from my career. I started as a technical writer, and my first formal leadership role was that I worked my way up to be the manager of the team that I was on. And that was a point where I had, it's been a few years, 5 or 6 direct reports. I was the manager of the knowledge base team. And I was very lucky and had a wonderful team. And that was the point in my career where I realized I did not aspire to be a people manager. I kind of had the best scenario I think I could. And there's just something about managing people that is really draining for me. I'm sure part of that is related to the fact that I'm an introvert. I'm sure part of it is related to just other sort of work preferences and styles. But over time, I really learned and discovered that kind of what you were talking about, Nick, that there's so many ways to lead that don't involve managing people directly. So since then, my career, I've really focused on how can I lead initiatives, programs, projects, change management, right? Leading a change management initiative so many great ways to lead without having direct reports. So that's something that I've sort of done intentionally. There was one other role where I did end up with one direct report, and I just for structure reasons, and I've mostly been happier in roles where that's not the case. I also spent many years on the leadership council of STC San Diego. Bethany, I just want to plug, like, anyone who has an opportunity to volunteer for STC and an STC chapter, just an amazing experience when it comes to being able to get leadership experience, really kind of try things out. There's low pressure, people are friendly, there's no consequences if you do something wrong. It's really a beautiful way to try out leadership. So I was president for a time, program manager for most years that I volunteered leadership team there. And now my role is the director of member engagement for the Consortium for Service Innovation. We're a nonprofit think tank focused on customer engagement. And I'm going to repeat that title again, director of member engagement. My job responsibility is literally to engage with people, to interact with people. That's my responsibility. And it's, yeah, also if I had told my former self that, I'd be very surprised, but it really works. It's focused on, focused on the work and things that we have in common, and things that have nothing to do with if you're shy or quiet or how you want to spend your weekend, which is mostly hanging out by myself with my dogs, because that's how I recharge. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about being an introvert. I love that slide shown at the beginning, and Lori talked about a bunch of that stuff as well. So yeah, those are my leadership highlights. Anyone can do it. Anyone can be a leader. Being an introvert, I think, is pretty unrelated to whether you can be a leader or not. Todd?
Oh, next. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So
Yes.
the journey, well, I guess it all started in the early 70s as a young child. No, I was just kidding. I was a shy kid, and then life progressed, other things happened. If people knew and have met me, as many of you have, and it's nice seeing everybody and being able to participate. But then say the last 15, 20 years of my professional career, you wouldn't recognize me from the person I was even growing up. I'd say through college, I would have considered myself, I know it was a terminology then, shy. We didn't use introverted that, but I think it's actually kind of applicable. It was just, I was social and other things too in some degrees, but in certain situations, I was just kind of shy, and it wasn't about energy, and we didn't think of it in a lot of the ways that we have tools and information and research to kind of back up and kind of compare how we are and have things, tests and strengths and all that. But all I know is in my mid-20s, I switched from, and it wasn't an overnight thing, but it really, it feels like something I just kind of grew into, was becoming something that was I was much more engaged and much more outward, willing to kind of initiate a little bit. And I think that's a big part of leadership in a lot of ways, and how some kind of us have transformed, or I think we all evolve on the spectrum of whatever we are between. I was one of the ones that said ambivert, and I'd call it a hybridvert now, just because that's a popular term a little bit. But part of that is, in my personality, I feel, as I switch, and I feel different ways at different times in different crowds and other kinds of things. It isn't consistent enough, and I can't put it into any particular description or timing that says I feel like I'm in this. It's, well, today I'm this, tomorrow I'm that. Sometimes I'm one, and it vacillates in between a little bit. My journey kind of evolved from, a lot of it has been through STC. My journey and the leadership of that is similar to Ben's, although I didn't do a tour as a VP, the VP tour of duty, those three extra pretty busy years. But that was engaging, and it started from just really, and it grew. And part of that is, I think, a confidence and an exposure and an experience that I think helps people become leaders too, to whatever fits with their personality. And I think that experience is what helped me evolve and build confidence to do more and initiate more. a lot of it initially, and where we as leaders, I think, can become and are more effective with people that we engage with, especially that are more introverted, is initiating and inviting. And it's through those interactions of the groups and things we participate in, knowing as my chapter things in various chapters where I kind of evolved from a bit of a watcher, and then I joined, and then I was kind of asked, and then I became more of a participant, and then a little more asking, I became a volunteer, and that each progression, I felt a little bit more comfortable working through. And then I was, Ben talked about doing saying yes, which is part of what improvisation is about, and kind of going with that and finding out, well, these experiences really make me feel better, or I like the engagements or the relationships or the confidence that those things bring. And it's been a continual involvement there. And as it's gone on, I've become more and more confident and more prone to initiating. And I like the points about leadership doesn't have to be with people. I was fortunate to have an opportunity and enjoyed it for a few years of leading a team. And that was because of the leadership I showed in doing other things. I was leading projects. I was leading a function. I was a solo tech writer senior for a lot of my career, but it was because of the demonstration of that leadership with that function and the engagement with different audiences and stuff that presented that opportunity. So I think a lot of that is, sometimes we come across and come into our leadership roles in different ways and at different kinds of levels, but really a lot of it is, I think we found opportunities, whether we decided to do it ourselves and step in, or we were kind of brought along. And then we find within that, when we get that zone and we reach out of our comfort zone, I think to grow and to find out, you have to push yourself and get into situations that you might not be comfortable with, and step into things that are gonna, because of fear you might hold back on, but you don't really grow, I think, until you kind of become uncomfortable and grow and improve and become confident to engage in that and to engage with more people at whatever level that is. Fortunately, we're in a good environment. COVID really exposed for what we are and how we feel and where our energies are and the spectrum of version there. But it's kind of nice that I think a lot of us probably, and as you progress, we find our lanes and know where we're comfortable at. But I think it's also important to kind of veer a little bit in one side or the other, because you're working with people that are across the spectrum. And hopefully that as we evolve and everyone evolves in whatever their leadership journey is, they have an appreciation for where they've been and where they're going, or where they are, and that other people are also on their own journeys there, and that we also have lots of bisecting that is really great opportunity for building connection. And ultimately that's what everyone appreciates, I think, whatever you are on the scale of version, it's that connection that really is what ties us a little bit together. So that's my spiel. And the crowd goes silent.
Oh, sorry, the crowd goes, all right, is it
Or
time for
the
questions
crowd
yet?"
goes muted. No.
I think that might be part
I
of
had the last word.
it.
Yeah, if I had a mic, I would have dropped it, but
I think we're all recharging, right?
Everyone's like, well, great meeting. Okay.
Oh,
we're
cool,
recovering from
done? No.
networking. Yeah.
No.
Now, I did want to mention, I dropped a couple of links into the chat. One of them is the podcast that I interviewed Sarah for, is the very first Hope for the Introvert podcast that she says I tricked her into doing. But it's a very good interview. I also put a link in there to a book by Alan Alda, which is, I think it says, "If I understood you, would I have this look on my face?" And that's something I have my Introverts and Leadership class read, along with the Susan Cain book, of course. But he talks about how improvisation exercises are helpful for communications for medical and scientific personnel or people. And I took that over to say, hey, that'll work really well for introverts too. And Todd and I have done some of those introvert improvisation exercises actually at Spectrum one year. That very painful thing where we had to stare at each other and try to say the same thing at the same time. So
That sounds amazing to watch and not be part of.
they're great fun. So not that exercise, but in general. Yeah.
So
I
I think,
have to say that I was in a team exercise many years ago. Well, we had 300 people in the group, leadership and all your individual contributors, and we had to wear a pig mask. So we will all be the same and then do exercises together. And believe it or not, some of the interviews, there's a lot of software developers in the team, and they tend to be introverted as well. And they actually were able to perform quite well in those team exercises because you didn't really have to clearly see who they are, because we were all the same, we were all one group. I thought it was interesting.
And we could all put all our avatars on.
yeah, I was
and
gonna
then
say
that, and then we can go out and, you know.
Back
Never
to
mind
where we
that.
were. Yes.
I think Julia, you're going to be moderating our questions. I see Lori's going to be right back, but I think we can continue. So, Julia, if you want to call on people, and if we have any gaps, do the prepared questions.
Sure. Jessica, you have your hand raised?
I was just trying to use some kind of protocol because one of the things that you guys all know me for is that I talk way too much and I'll tend to butt in. I have introvert tendencies, but I would guess if I said that, you'd all laugh because you've been around me. But I wanted to make the observation that being in something that none of you have brought up, but that you probably would have to be not an introvert to see. So I just thought I would jump in here and offer it, in that one of the things I have learned working with people on this group, and even to a lesser extent, some of the people on my team, yeah, as you mentioned, some of the QA people, the dev people are also introverts, but I have learned to be quiet and listen, because sometimes there's that silence. And it's funny, my boss is like me, and I've heard him complain about other members of my team. And I think, I was like, if you'll just wait, they're going to say something brilliant, and it's going to be something you hadn't thought of and you couldn't have thought of because you were too busy talking. You're talking, and I know that I've learned to understand that because someone's introverted, that could just mean that they're really thinking it through. And if you just let the silence go, they will say something really great. And I didn't hear anybody say that. I just wanted to point out, because it's something I've observed from watching all of you these past few years, but also just in the workplace. It's something to, I don't know, maybe if you're in a job interview, you say, well, you might not, I'm not going to be the loudest person, but when I do talk, it will matter, because that's what I have found is some of the people who don't talk the most, it's like the thing they say is like a product improvement that really would change everything. And you can tell that they really know what they're talking about. It's just that they don't talk much. So I don't know. I just wanted to offer that because I really learned that from this group. Be quiet.
Yeah.
and
So Jessica,
say
I got.
something great.
Sorry, I will blurt in.
No, I do it all
because
the
I've got to
time.
talk first, right? Of course. I had a conversation with the technical communicator in England, and she's actually on the podcast, which is, I haven't done any new episodes in a couple of years, but there are a bunch of them out there. But we talked about meeting behavior, and every time I talk about introverts and leadership to any group, meeting behavior comes up. It's one of the big things. And in the conversation I had with Helen, we were talking about it, and she observed that there are two kinds of people in meetings. There are the people who are waiting and waiting and waiting because they don't want to interrupt, but they want to share their information. And then there are the people who will keep talking until they're interrupted because they believe that if someone has something to say, they will interrupt them. And it just tends to lead to a lot of frustration. But we also talked about what ends up having is your last 2 minutes of the meeting, all of a sudden you have people blurting things out they didn't get an opportunity to say, and it's more like, where did that come from? While we might be sitting there saying, well, they just please shut up so we can say something. So just think it's an interesting dynamic.
Yes, very. I agree. And yeah.
And WC has his hand up.
I do. A couple of things that, based on a long career, it's time to share, right? First off, some days I find it just impossibly hard to talk, to make conversation with people. I cannot do it. It is such an effort. And the fact that the effort is so high says it's not worth doing, and I don't. But I found sometime very, very early on, college perhaps, that if I stepped into other roles, suddenly I could animate and exchange much more easily. For example, as president of my residence hall house, for some reason, we decided to put on a program, Sunday night program series. And I could get on the phone and call the basketball coach at Iowa State University and invite him to come out, and he'd come out, and it just worked marvelously. Now, if I was W.C. Weiss asking this, it would never happen. But as president of Sage House, Iowa State University, I could. And that kind of has triggered ever since, being my roles in STC, for example. I would never have these conversations or do these things as myself. But in those assigned positions, suddenly I was empowered. The other part, probably the last thing to share, is along the way, one of the personality inventories that I had showed that my default position is more introversion. But I had the ability to become an extrovert. It took more effort, took more energy, but I could do it, particularly in these assigned roles where it became easier to do it. So let me share that with you. Go ahead and do something, take on an assignment, become somebody.
That's a good point. Sometimes, I mean, we've all heard a lot of years recently is, kind of fake it till you make it. And there can be some value in that, and kind of projecting and acting that, and kind of doesn't have to be literal like me at a summit conference wearing a hat or a different hat for a role, but it can be, a virtual identity or something. And sometimes online, that's an opportunity too, because a lot of people haven't met and don't know each other in person. So it's often, who somebody is basically what you're presenting, and how you present that can, can just fill whatever space or role or whatever is needed at the time, what that is versus, and we all to some degrees kind of go between roles or acts or, kind of different things there. So that's some good point.
I'm not seeing any raised hands. So shall I grab a question from the question bank?
Go for it.
Okay. What tips do you have for new or aspiring introverted leaders?
Julia, do you want us to just kind of each share one? Is that the best way to go after this? Gosh, there's so many things. I mean, Lori referenced
your own
it.
limit.
Yeah, no, Lori referenced it at the initial very part of it when she said, despite being an introvert, and saying, no, that's not the way it is. Because as introverts, we have a very maybe unique set of skills. And part of that is the ability to listen and not feel like we have to think of the next thing we're going to say, but actually listen to the person and hear them out. But the other thing I would say, and I'll keep it to the two things, you start with small steps, and you get those small steps and you get those small successes, and then you build on them. And I have one slide I use that shows me, actually, it shows the top of the Manitowoc Incline in Colorado Springs. And you kind of get, when you've moved into these leadership positions that you feel so uncomfortable in, and then I kind of look down, it's like, my goodness, when did I climb that incline? Because I feel more confident now, and I can certainly put on the extroverted persona at a conference, and people would never think I was an introvert, depending on the conference. But it's that really start small, take those small steps, build on those small successes. And also, as Todd mentioned, that yes, and if you get an opportunity, try it out. Don't just turn it down.
I can share one. My favorite tip to share it on this topic is basically that you're never going to feel ready to do something you haven't done before. So if you're sitting around waiting for the day that you're going to wake up and suddenly feel ready to be a leader and not apprehensive, not uncomfortable, it's not, if you've never done something before, you're going to be uncomfortable the first time you do it. I like to often think about the analogy of working out, whether it's building muscle or training for an endurance run. You're going for that run, like your lungs burn, or you lift weights, the next day your muscles are going to physically hurt. That's how you get stronger. That's how you get better. And I think the same thing applies for new experiences professionally as well. If you're putting yourself in a scenario that's new to you, expect to be uncomfortable, enjoy that part, right? The uncomfortable part is the only way for you to then get comfortable. And so kind of expect it and know that it has nothing to do with you being an introvert or an extrovert. It's the same for everyone. If it's a new experience, it's going to be uncomfortable until you try it. Ben, I think you were just talking about this a bit, and Todd, you touched on this a bunch, right? You gotta find where you're comfortable, find your lane, and then every so often force yourself to step out of your lane and see what happens.
Yeah, I think to build on that a little bit is, especially if you're not sure, part of it's that initiating or where to start and what's going to find. We use the word passion a lot. Find an interest or something that you like and that you enjoy, because it's going to push you and you're going to perform and engage more than you would if, and don't pick something that, okay, well, I think I should do that because it's good. If you have no interest in it, you don't like it, you don't want to do it, you're not going to have as good a chance of success. And pushing yourself to those possible limits and the edges of the lane and into other lanes, if it's something that doesn't drive you in some way, and because you're also going to demonstrate more outward, or even just it'll show. We all show and we all perform better when we're doing something, and we drive more and we try harder and we push longer on things that we enjoy, even if we don't do it great at first. But if we kind of are interested in it or like it or want to do something, it's something we want to expand into. I think that's an opportunity to kind of find a way to grow into that and then learn kind of from there too. You'll have a better chance of success.
I love that. Like, plan to be uncomfortable, but be uncomfortable pursuing something that you want. Don't just pursue discomfort for the sake of it, right? Train for a marathon if you want to run a marathon.
To run. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to just share a slightly different perspective. No, this is just for me personally, but I find the whole concept of getting uncomfortable to be a little bit disturbing. This is just for me. It's not, it's probably okay for everyone. I might be the outlier here. But the reason for that is that when I think of uncomfortable, I think of homeless people on the street, of which there are many in the area where the business part of the area where I live. I think of people struggling, to make ends meet in this highly inflationary culture right now, and just not having enough, to eat or whatever. So to me, there is so much discomfort in the world. So I tried not to put my own challenges in that perspective. A couple of concepts that help me are, number one, have faith and be bold. I remember President Kennedy, when he gave a famous speech about sending someone to the moon within the next decade, he said, "We must be bold." And that is very inspirational to me, because sometimes I ask myself, I want to be bold. What can I do to be bold? And that inspires me, in a way. And also just having faith. And I'm not talking about religious faith, but just faith that I can do this thing. It might be scary. I may not feel entirely confident, but if I can have faith that somehow I will work through that fear and that there really isn't anything to be afraid of. I can move forward. And if I fall on my face, all I've done is fall on my face. I've got 2 strong legs. I can get up and start walking again. So those are things that help me kind of move forward a little bit. And so I appreciate everybody's perspective, and I really like the idea that, you can't force yourself to do something you're not interested in, and that is absolutely important, because anything that you want to do right, any way that you want to stand out as a leader, you have to have some passion and love for it, because if you don't have that people will pick up on that. So you can't force yourself to do things you don't want to do. You just have to know yourself, like, do I really want to do this? And if the answer is no, that's okay.
And somewhat related to that, I would say, and this is for any fellow high anxiety introverts out there, it seems cliche to say, but we are our own worst critics. And if what's stopping you from doing something you want to do is fear of embarrassing yourself or falling flat on your face, as it were, something that I found empowering that my counselor had actually told to me was, most people are focused primarily on their own experience, not on what you're doing. They're focused on what they're going to say next, as many people in a meeting might be, or on what they're experiencing in front of them. And any little minor slip up you might make, or anything that you might even perceive as, oh, I said that wrong. Now people are going to think this about me. Most people won't even notice it. And if they do, it's probably not going to stick around in their minds for very long.
That actually makes me think of, I think it might have been a Tumblr post, but something where someone had said, you're the main character in your own story, but you're someone's supporting character. You're someone's best friend. You're someone's whatever. And they're the main character of their own story.
Yeah, that's very true.
I think you have to remember, we often don't give ourselves credit for when we do push through and learn something new, or surprise ourselves with how bold we really were. We have to give ourselves credit for that, because oftentimes we don't. And so if you do, kind of push through or push through an obstacle or whatever, give yourself a pat on the back. Be proud.
And also, on the negative side of that, know that something probably will go wrong. When you just accept that as the pressure to be perfect. I don't know, this is probably a function of age, when you're like, yeah, something unforeseen happened. I've been in meetings where someone did a fantastic presentation and then the sound went out in the middle and nobody knows why. Stuff like that, and so it's I don't know why that comforts
Or
me, but it
somebody's
does.
out sick for 2 days that was supposed to present, right? And then
Yeah,
you have to present their charts and think on your feet and just go for it, right?
exactly. I don't know why that comforts me. It probably shouldn't, but it's always like, something will probably go wrong. It's okay.
Yeah.
It takes the
You're a
pressure off a little bit.
pessimistic introvert. We haven't gotten into the
No.
pessimistic optimism
Oh.
spectrum. Let's mix it up here.
Yeah.
Let's make it real fun.
So I think part of I work in an IT organization. The expectation is that something's going to go wrong at least once a day, and we just have to manage through it. But the improvisation, the yes and, you just work with what you have and keep moving, is a good portion of it. I had a presentation I gave for a university in Canada that was virtual, and it was on Google Meet, and my audio wouldn't work at all. And I ended up having to call in on my phone and do the audio on the phone while I was doing the presentation on my camera. And it's like, you just I don't think I was flustered, because I'm just so used to you just have to keep pushing through it and get it done. But I don't think I'm pessimistic. I just think that, hey, you work in IT, it's just part of our day. It's our day. have challenges, we figure out how to overcome them.
That's for sure. I share an office with 2 IT guys, and they deal with stuff that falls down and breaks all the time. You know, whether it's computers or processes or anything else, you know, their lives are full of dealing with imperfection. And, you know, it makes me grateful that I'm not a perfectionist myself. But you know, it's always like, you know, remember that motto, I think it was the Boy Scouts, be prepared. And, you know, so you can feel, you know, optimistic and hopeful about things, but just kind of be prepared as well.
And also just sometimes there's a pressure to not start because you think, well, something could go wrong. It's almost, to me, it's almost like, well, something probably will go wrong. So it almost just, it's like, all right, you know, that sort of the glass half empty. I like that. I was just thinking about the glass half full and half empty. I was thinking, well, you know, I've always thought, well, isn't it both? So there we go. It's both half full and half empty.
Yeah, I think there's another piece of that is that easy road, you don't grow at all. You don't necessarily learn anything. It may be very comfortable walking along it. But for me, it's the experiences that have stretched me that I think have been the most meaningful. And none of them have really broken me, but they are sometimes hard to push through. But I feel like I look back on my career and my leadership journey, and it's figuring out how to push through some of those things that really got me to wherever I got. I'm not sure where that is, but generally, I just think it's a perseverance thing as well.
Yeah, and I'll go to some a little bit of the Buddhist thing a bit too. It's all temporary. Things will pass, and things are, you know, everything will keep changing and evolve too. And what lasts and lingers is often like we think about ourselves. We always think about and ponder and worry about it much more and longer than anybody else does as well. And it's most things are events that happen in brief periods of time. You and everybody else, the quicker people move on, learn, grow, or do whatever from it. And or the flip side is also not always reacting, gets to that listening and just kind of letting things happen. If you have the time and respond versus react, I always find that as a good leadership trait quality, because, you know, because even in the moment that you might choose to respond, it's going to change again, and reacting to something too quickly or thinking about or worrying about too much, you kind of do yourself a disservice often in that way because of whatever angst or thoughts or worries you might have about something. It'll all pass, and it'll all pass quicker than you usually think. And then, you know, you get a chance to do it again or differently the next time, or you'll know from that what you want to try or avoid again.
And a question from David Coe in the chat. How do introverts handle conflict?
I try to avoid it. No, seriously, I've worked for managers and I've watched them just kind of run full speed into a wall over and over and over. And it's like, when are they gonna learn that, oh, all you have to do is walk around here and you're on the other side of that wall? I do not like conflict. And I think the hardest part of it, when you avoid conflict, I think it makes, and not dealing with things when they're small sometimes, it makes it much, much harder. And honestly, it is still something I am learning, and I've had to work through my share of it. But I think part of it is owning my own responsibility in what may have produced whatever that conflict is. And I'm quite comfortable with leading with, I'm sorry, I screwed up on this. We need to move forward on that. But I hate conflict.
Yeah, now I'm curious to hear from the other panelists, because I am passionately conflict averse. I have been my whole life. I will avoid like a truly awkward conversation, even if there end up being worse consequences. But I've never made the connection to wonder if that is part of being introvert or if it's Like I thought I got it from my mom, but maybe she had it too because she was an introvert. So conflict averse here. What about others?
It's been a journey for me. I'm naturally very conflict averse, but I think in my career, and even in leadership for our STC chapter, I've learned what constructive conflict looks like, and that it can be a force for good, and that introverts really do have a superpower when it comes to conflict, which is that ability to listen and to process. I prefer to handle my now, don't get me wrong, I prefer to handle my conflicts not in real time. If I can type it out in an email that's really well thought out, maybe get someone to preview it, give me some feedback on it before I send it, that'd be great. But sometimes we don't always have that luxury either. But either way, showing empathy, listening to what the other person has to say, showing that you are approaching it in good faith, goes a long way, I think.
Yeah, agreed. That ties back to where I think about the respond and don't react, because oftentimes, emotions, especially initially, are more charged. So often time can help a little bit from both sides. Occasionally avoidance can work, I've found. Other times it's don't engage. It depends on, as you learn and you get more with personalities, on how to manage the conflict, and the empathy is important, knowing, well, they've got a reason for that. But sometimes I've had to come to some things where it's going to be, we're not going to get on the same page, and we're not going to get consensus, and something either has to get escalated or let go, and kind of pick what what you really want to go to based on how important something is, or it depends what's involved. I work in an environment where conflict and raising your voice and other stuff can be very important, because we're a very safety oriented culture, because of what's happens in the lab. There are accidents, there's lots of equipment and lots of dangerous kinds of things that can come up. So conflict isn't inherently bad. It can often mean a difference of opinion, and then coming and trying to remove emotion from it and having discussion, so that both people can see where each other's sort of coming from, and the listening part is an important skill there. I think can help you kind of navigate that and decide, well, what's the path forward and how important is it? Because a lot of things that come at conflict, in my experience, I'd say 80+% of things that are conflict weren't even something I should have either engaged in, worried about so much, or tried to negotiate or manage or respond to. Half of them I could have just let go and not worried about, because they often go away from the other side too, because they're often in something that seems more urgent and important, but it often time can sometimes do that, if you have that luxury. Some things I've learned.
Yeah, I mean, Garrison Keillor had a phrase I heard many years ago, which he talked about living a life of obstinate kindness. And I've tried to adopt that, in the sense that I do want to diffuse conflict. I do want to make sure that I hear what the other person is saying. It's not always possible, but it makes such a difference in terms of, well, maintaining any kind of relationship, if you don't blow it and you're not screaming at the other person. But I've had projects I've been given at work because I haven't managed to burn those bridges. And it's like everyone else on the team, no, they can't do it, so you get to do it. So maybe it's a curse in some ways, but that I do try to look at that. I am going to be kind in as much as I can, in any kind of work relationship. So.
Lori, did you want to chime in on that? If not, I do have another question that I can go to.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's been a while. Could you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just scroll back, find it. How do introverts handle conflict?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's a tough one. Like Ben, I'm not really comfortable with conflict. So what I try to do is try to, if there is a conflict situation, I try to like minimize the conflict as much as possible, or at least identify it in constructive terms. So it doesn't sound like we're just, picking a fight, so I just might say, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Here is what, here's what I think we're dealing with. So I try to, be realistic if there's a conflict, but at the same time, not use conflict language, either in my tone of voice or in my choice of words. So I try not to use like fighting words like, well, that doesn't make sense, or we can't do that, or, anything like that, anything that sounds argumentative, because what we want to do is resolve the conflict, or at least minimize it to the greatest extent that we can. And I'm not a person that thrives on conflict. I really don't like it. I prefer harmony, but I know that conflict sometimes does arise, and we just have to diffuse it the best way we can while being realistic about it. So I don't like conflict, but I know I can't avoid it or duck away from it either.
And the next question is from Alex, and he asks, how many of you ended up as the one who did all the work in school group projects?
So I can't say I was the best student in my undergrad, and I probably was one of the person who let some of those other people do a majority of the work. It's crossed over into my teaching because I get very few group assignments because of that issue that you're referencing, Alex. And I had a while, I was letting them do peer reviews of each other, and they were just scathing. And it's like, I think I'm going to abandon this type of work for a little bit. But no, I typically was not the one who did most of the work. But I've also, a lot of time, as an introvert, I kind of like either working with a couple of people I know really well and collaborating, or just doing the work myself.
And I think it's part of being conflict adverse, as we were talking earlier, that sometimes if that conflict does come up in a group setting, you just, like I was saying, put your nose to the grindstone and just do the work, right? And then kind of get steamrolled by the rest of the group sometimes. If back in school, you just do it because it needs to be done. Yeah, anybody else have that type of experience back in school?
Well, everyone
Oh.
goes off to their corners and does
Exactly.
their own parts, and then what happens is, or often the thing that doesn't work with the group is because it lacks leadership or somebody that's helping. And leadership in that sense, I think, is more coordination and trying to find what people, what people can't. The most successful ones are what people usually don't want to all do the same thing. If you have a mix of groups and personalities, someone wants to do this or someone wants to do that, and trying to find the things that people want to do will bring it together, and having it be coordinated is helpful. And I think it's when there's a lack of that coordination or leadership is when that kind of project tends to just get off the rails, or just people go off, and then it's such a struggle to try to bring it together that it doesn't look cohesive, and everybody notices that, and it's too different versus trying to come up with, and it can be a challenge getting a group on the, even on the same page. But that's just some observations.
I'm going to have to put my cards way out on the table here and say I don't like group projects. When we did some in school, it was just frustrating to me. I felt constrained. Now, in a very few rare cases, I was okay with it. But what I found in some group projects is someone becomes the alpha, and they kind of, end up being the dominant part of the group. Or, and this is a friend of mine talked about this, where one person kind of ends up doing all the work. But I just feel more like I'm doing something, if I can work independently. Now, I certainly don't mind being, consulting with other groups, providing feedback or asking for feedback on projects that I'm working on. So in that sense, I'm certainly happy to collaborate with others, but just saying, okay, team A is going to work on this and team B is going to work on that. That was not my favorite thing to do. And my most successful work in both undergrad and grad school was stuff I could do by myself. So that's just me.
I almost made it through schooling without having a team experience like that, but right at the finish line, my capstone undergrad course, I was named team manager or team leader or whatever the term was by the other team members, which led to having a lot of extra work to do. And I think, and this ties into conflict as well, learning sometimes to say no is a challenge, and it's something that I've been working on personally.
It's interesting, Alex, you raised this, I just saw your comment, but you raised this in the context of school. But honestly, in the workplace, we are all pretty much in virtual teams now, and we do have to figure this out. I know the Tuckman thing about the forming the team, storming, norming, and performing, I think is actually a real thing. I think part of it has to do with being on a team long enough to know how these different pieces fit together. And I think school projects, you don't really get that. But Sarah, we've done how many proposals together, how many presentations together, and we just know how each other works and we're comfortable with it. And that kind of thing works really well. But I do think, and this is why I'm struggling with whether to have group projects in class, because that is the workplace now. I work in virtual teams. We all work in virtual teams. And we do need to be able to do that well. So it's a tricky thing. I don't know, I'm kind of reevaluating what to do, but I hate giving group projects and I hate seeing what happens with them.
I know in my experience, typically back in like elementary, high school, it was a small school, so we were able to really get to know each other. And typically we'd say, you're really good at this, you like doing this, so could you do this part? And going into college, I did the same thing. Hey, who wants to do this part? And in terms of looking at it from the teacher perspective, in 2 of my classes, I had Dr. Glashoff, and her approach, seeing as it was a class based on collaboration, was we're going to go to the whiteboard, we're going to write down the different things that need to be done, put your name under your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and we're going to make teams that way.
Yeah, giving people an opportunity to volunteer or step in, can be useful there if you have that luxury.
Well, and that sort of fits with kind of tying what you, Ben, and Julia both said, tying them together in the workplace. Yes, there will be group projects, there will be collaborative work, but it's likely to be founded from like your role, which is likely to be based off of your personal preferences. So how can you sort of emulate that with a group project? I think the example you just gave now, Julia, is perfect, right? Here's a group project, here's what has to be done. If this was your job, like which of these, if this was a company, which of these would be your job choice, and try to sort of craft the assignments that way.
Yeah, and I think Ben, makes a good point that in the workplace that teams are where it's at essentially.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to work with a team. And of course, I work with lots of teams at work. And I think what helps me is that if I feel that there's something unique I can contribute to the team, then that kind of helps me feel like I'm contributing both to the team, but, just having some individual identity and some identity attached for myself. So if I can have that combination, that's great. And, I think work teams for me have been a different experience than, working on group projects in grad or undergraduate school. That was a little bit different, a little bit more frustrating in some ways, but in the workplace, you gotta be able to work with teams. You just have to.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I just joined a new team 4 or 5 months ago. And we just had our first, or my first, technical interchange meeting, right, with our customer, in which customers from all over the country come together and come talk to us, and they bring their perspectives, we bring our perspectives, we're all on the same mission, but then there's also factions, right? So it's a week-long dynamic where you're just exchanging ideas and see what the mission needs and what the best thing to do for the project is. So it's for an introvert, it's challenging, right? Because there's so many, you have to learn when to pipe up and say, okay, yes, that's the way you should do it, but let's document it this way, right? So, because at the end of the day, we need to deliver something soon, right? So it's
But the political factions piece is a very real thing, right?
yes,
And you have some groups that just don't want to work with other groups. And I've run into that as well. And I can't say it's necessarily, I mean, I tend to diffuse conflict, but it's sometimes, it's kind of tough because sometimes some members of the group would rather see the group fail than, work together towards the greater good, whatever that might be. And that, I don't think I've really figured all that one out yet.
Yeah, I think that, communication is the key to success with teams. How you communicate and your intent, the intent that you communicate. Because if you want to help, make a positive contribution, I think your team is going to pick that up. I think people are a lot more, they kind of get your vibes a lot more than we think they might, And one fortunate thing that I've had is that, I have been able to work with our QA and development teams, and I have built up a relationship with trust with these teams. And even though my work is very different from them, there are things we have in common. They are developers. I'm a developer. I develop content. They develop product interfaces in the back end. And I have some in common with QA. They're concerned with quality. I'm concerned with quality, the quality of communication. So, we do have, common elements between us, even though the type of work we do is very different. And I think if you can look for those common elements and see how they manifest themselves on both your side of the house and their side of the house, you can really build some good team relationships where trust becomes an important part of your success.
Yep, that's the big, I was in a recent interview the last week, and a lot of the role is about developing and building relationships and the trust and other stuff. And fortunately, I think that ties in really well with the communication and getting to, I know we're going to hit a time bump too, but to David's question a little bit about working with other teams in an Agile and how to do that. I'm happy to be out of the software hamster wheel for a little while those last couple of years and things, but what I've learned, and I think the effectiveness of finding the effective ways to communicate with people and to build the relationships and getting to know them a little personally, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of that, and kind of finding the things where you can relate to, and or whether it's a shared goal, a shared objective, or whatever that can be. But we also are fortunate as introverts too, with a lot of these technologies, to have lots of different ways to find the best ways to work with communication of people who are across the spectrum of whatever their versions are. And for example, the asynchronous communication of things like in Slack or Teams, of things in chats and or phone calls and other stuff, I just say we've got the opportunity is we've got such a great toolbox. And as technologically inclined introvert people, we can really utilize a lot of those different ways and avenues to find what really works. And sometimes it's just trial and error, because you'll go, well, I email this person 14 times and I don't get anything. But if I send them a chat and it's nice and you're just, I'll get a response. And or the culture is email or chat or whatever it is, or a phone, whether it's a client and other things. You're just going to find what's the best avenue there and do that, and just find what works and be flexible on different communication methods and styles are going to work more effectively with different people.
Yeah, I want to give a very quick plug. I did, oh gosh, it was, I think, 8 hours of liberating structures training, which is used with agile teams. And it's interesting, the article does say it's messy, and I would agree with that 100%. But what it does is kind of change group dynamics and make sure that everyone has a voice, and kind of gets rid of some of the hierarchical stuff. So we've been exploring doing some of these, and I did post an article link. We've been experimenting doing some of these in my IT organization, and we went through 6 hours over the last 2 days using liberating structures to try to work towards developing a vision statement. And honestly, it was so painful, but everyone's voice was heard in it. So I think that's kind of fits the question that came up from David about what works with agile environments. I don't know, any of us really enjoy it, but we're just we understand how to work through it now.
I can divert for a second. You mentioned vision statement or mission statement.
It's
Thinking of, we have a survey out. We're trying to see if we need to revamp ours.
so we're working on customer.
link?
Yeah, we're working on customer experience in our IT organization, and what they're trying to do is come up with what is that customer experience model looks like in terms of how we engage with our internal customers. It's more vision than mission. Honestly, it's so messy right now. I can't tell you exactly where it's going to end up. We got it down to like 10 things, but we haven't all agreed on what those 10 things all mean yet. And the goal is to knock it down to 5. And Julia, I will be happy to update you as that progress goes on, but I think we have at least another 2 hours to do it. And this is a team of probably 20, 22 people working on this together. So I don't know, some of the stuff is hard, but some of these tools work pretty well.
I haven't seen any other questions in chat, but thank you for letting me divert for a second. So let's see here.
I'm not sure we have time for another question. We're like 4 minutes out, so it might be time for any closing thoughts from our panelists. Time flew.
For time checking me.
Yeah, no problem. You want to, for any of the panelists have closing thoughts, we can go around. I know Ben's been going first, so I think Ben has to go first again if he's got something to say.
I hope that meant I got to go last this time.
Oh, sorry.
But no, that's fine. I think the really key thing, and I've done a fair amount of mentoring with introverts moving into leadership positions, and a lot of it does involve identifying and recognizing your strengths and playing to those strengths. And I think Susan Cain, it's not in the quiet book. It's in something else that she said recently. Sometimes, to succeed, you need to be in the right light. So basically, there are some job positions or environments we might in where we can succeed very well. There are some that we're not good fits for. But I think the key thing, around this again is we're not handicapped as introverts. at all. I think we have strengths. We learn how to harness those strengths. We practice those strengths, and that's how we grow.
Hi, I think that the most important takeaway for me and the most important thing I hope that we can all feel good about as introverts is, as Ben said, it is a trait and it has many positive aspects to it. You know, we have insights, you know, we just, you know, since we're typically, you know, good listeners, at least, you know, we try to be, and you know, so we have a lot to contribute. It's not something we need to overcome, you know, it's not a problem, you know, or anything like that. And I think that we just need to feel that it's okay. We are fine the way we are. Our challenge is to grow in the context of being an introvert. And we can be just as effective a leader as anyone, no matter what their personality or anything else. You know, we can do it. We can lead. And if there's anything important that I have learned in my life, it's that I don't have to be at ground zero anymore. I thought I could never, ever, ever be any type of leader. And fortunately, I know that's not true anymore. And for that, I am extremely grateful.
I think my closing thoughts are just that, you know, society might have its biases toward, you know, saying that you're lesser if you're introverted or if you're a sensitive person, or even if you're not a formal leader like a manager. But I think at the end of the day, we all have something to contribute, and we all can lead in various ways, just by being who we are. And so I would say focus on what you want to do and what you want to strive for. And don't worry so much about what other people say or think people are supposed to be like. As long as you're approaching things with, you know, the best of intentions, things will work out, probably.
I'd say that even though we just spent a lovely hour and a half talking about being introverts, that when it comes to work, whether or not you're an introvert, in my opinion, is one of the least influential factors when it comes to actually shaping your career. I don't know exactly what the ranking is, but I think that we add a false importance to being an introvert, and that it, especially in the workplace, it's one of many factors, and that maybe sometimes people who identify as introverts use it as an excuse for why things are uncomfortable, or why they're not achieving what they want. And so I think it's lovely to have conversations about this, don't get me wrong, but I think it's minor on the scale of things that matter in terms of what you're going to be able to achieve in your career. So that's my final thought.
And my final thought is that it may seem or feel scary, but most doors that you're going to encounter don't have anything scary on the other side, and they're usually unlocked or open. So just knock or step through and, you know, move forward.
Hey, thank you all so much. We would do a round of applause if we were in a physical room. I know you can do the little applause reaction, or I do the little clapping hands here in Zoom. Thank you so much to our panelists. We're so grateful for you taking time and using your limited emotional energy to be here with us. We know that is a sacrifice you have made on our behalf, and we are grateful for it. So thank you for sharing your expertise. I hope you get to enjoy whatever your favorite recharging activity is, whether that's watching Netflix or reading a book or spending time with some sort of pet. But we're glad you're here. So just a reminder, our next chapter meeting, as I said, is December 15th. But for now, I hope everyone take care and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Good meeting all.